Hello everybody, Dark Skeleton here, and in this video I'm going to give my personal review of Final Fantasy XIV, the free trial edition. So this is from the perspective of someone coming from Final Fantasy XI and World of Warcraft in the distant past, and now decided to play the game, Final Fantasy XIV, up to level 20. To generalize the feeling of Final Fantasy XIV, it's a hybridization of most of the good parts about MMORPGs that came before it. The combat and questing system is relatively straightforward, much like that of World of Warcraft. Any new player wouldn't have a trouble getting from level 1 through 20 if they give it a day or two of solid play. Dungeons or instances are introduced after level 15 and follow the model of progressing through a series of trash mobs to reach a boss, and the boss drops loot, and many of the bosses have their own mechanics which make the fight a little bit more interesting. This style of instance where your group is made up of healers, DPS, and a tank, and you progress through the dungeon is pulled pretty much straight out of World of Warcraft, but you honestly can't blame the game for that. Every successful MMORPG in this 3D overarching world style has basically done that to be successful ever since that game was released. So is Final Fantasy XIV a WoW clone? No more so than any other RPG or MMORPG is made very similar to other MMORPGs. Final Fantasy XIV has also drawn in other mechanics from other games that have actually proved to be pretty successful, such as telegraphed AoE attacks, where if you happen to sit in those attacks, you take a lot of damage for basically being stupid. And while most modern RPGs do have don't stand in the fire type mechanics, I would argue that this sort of action combat is a little bit more similar to another game like Terra Online instead of World of Warcraft. But aside from the mechanics changes that arrive in Final Fantasy XIV because it's a much newer game, the thing that really separates the game apart from other MMORPGs is the universe. As an ex-Final Fantasy XI player and fan, I think it's very, very cool that the Final Fantasy XIV universe is kind of like a spiritual successor to that game. You have many of the same spells, monster types, and overarching plot lines that really tie together with the Final Fantasy universe. If you don't have a world-saving quest involving you being a crystal warrior of the light, then it's not exactly a Final Fantasy game, is it? Oh, and speaking of Final Fantasy, the thing that really tops everything off with this game is the music. Given Final Fantasy's track record and having great content when it comes to music, this should hardly be surprising, but at least with the remake of Final Fantasy XIV and Realm Reborn, I think that they've done a fantastic job making the music really bring the game to life here. Now, to talk a little bit about my experience going levels 1 through 20 inside of the game, it is a mostly straightforward experience where you go on basically standard kill quests, kill 6 monsters, or pick up 4 of a random item from this area over there, or go basically walk over to the next quest hub so you can get a series of more quests. It's all very standard fare. However, what annoys me about this type of questing is that you are essentially required to actually go on all these quests. You can't just grind like you could in the old Final Fantasy XI, which, yes, was boring at times, but at least you had a choice. In this game, if you don't go through the quest lines, you don't complete the story quests, you don't get access to things like the Innkeeper or Guild Leaves. Heck, you can't even go on the dungeons of this game unless you complete the storyline quests that lead up to them. Which, if you're willing to go along with it, is fine, and for pretty much everybody, yeah, that's going to be okay. You're going to do the quests anyway. But the fact that the game basically says you absolutely have to do this stuff or you can't progress in the game, it's a little bit annoying, honestly. It's one thing when a game gives you some tutorials for newer players who want to complete them to get started. It's another thing when the entire game is basically a hand-holding process, or in other words, a guided tour that's supposed to make you feel like the hero, but you don't really feel like you're accomplishing anything because you know exactly what's going on. You're just following the script of the game. Now, although most of the questing is really par for the course and average, what I do like about the system is Guild Leaves, because you can go and take these quests out, where basically you can repeat them, you can do them in any order you want, and use that to level up after you've exhausted all of your other quests. In a lot of ways, having those Guild Leaves is like having a solo instance just for you, which I think is pretty nice. One thing that I really liked from Final Fantasy XI, and I'm quite glad that they brought back in 14 is the ability to change your job at any time. You can literally have one character be anything and everything within the game. You don't have to create a new character for every time you want to try out a different class. In fact, the game, from my understanding, gives you double XP when you're trying to level in a secondary job. In a lot of ways, by allowing people to easily level up other classes, it becomes easier for someone in the group to be able to heal, someone to be able to tank, and I imagine when it gets into the later stages of the game, when you need those roles, someone will be available to switch into one of them and tank the instance or do the healing that's necessary. Being that I've always kind of played that filler role where I play whatever's needed, I think that that's actually quite useful to have. Now, about the classes themselves, I can't comment too much on exactly how complicated they get. I've seen a couple videos where Ninja was kind of explained to me as a class that does become a little bit more tricky to play than some of the other ones, but certain classes like, let's say, Conjurer, are incredibly boring to level up. I think literally about 50% of the player base was initially starting as a Scholar, so that they could summon Carbuncle, or they were starting as a Lancer because, hey, it's like a pseudo-Dragoon, and being a Dragoon is cool, you get to poke everything with a spear. But Conjurers literally get 2 offensive spells before they hit level 20. And yes, they're meant to be healers. I rolled one so that I could be a healer and actually be useful to a group and, high value and all that. But, I mean, damn, when you have to spend 20 levels casting Stone, Arrow, Stone, 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 Stone. Now, I don't think that all classes in the game are going to be that boring to solo grind up initially. I also had the chance to play Gladiator up to about level 12, and it has a nice interaction where after using Fast Blade, one of your next abilities is going to be empowered, where it's actually worth using it over another Fast Blade. So for instance, if you're about level 6 or 7 and you want to optimize your DPS as a Gladiator, which is a tank class by the way, you would use Fast Blade and then follow that up with, I believe it's called Savage Swing. And then when you hit about level 10, you get another ability that does even more damage following up a Fast Blade. However, it loses the effect of Savage Swing, which generates extra enmity, which is basically aggro. However, that extra skill that does more damage also recovers your MP. So I could see how once you get into instances as a Gladiator, you actually have a choice sometimes. And that's the thing that makes actually playing a class more interesting, when you have to think about what button you're going to press next. As for the resource harvesting classes, it's interesting that you can actually level up in them, and literally gain levels and more HP in them, though we would never use them for combat. I thought that the ability to harvest resources was done a little bit more interesting in this game, where it's kind of made a minigame a bit. You actually get to choose, as a miner at least, which item you want to try to get, and you have a % chance to get it. Plus, when you're playing a resource harvesting class or a crafting class, you can actually go on guild leave quests that correspond with those classes, so you have a little bit more interaction in the game than you would in your typical MMORPG. You can actually play the classes, I believe, up to level 60. And I think overall, the way it's been implemented into Final Fantasy XIV is a little bit of an improvement over other MMORPGs in the past, though obviously everybody's main focus is going to be about playing those combat classes, naturally. So why would you want to play Final Fantasy XIV when you could play another non-MMORPG? Well, the main reason, for me at least, that you play MMORPGs is when you want to hang out with other friends, you want to share the experience, or maybe you just want to meet new people or hang out with some other people online. These games are grindy and quite repetitive in nature. However, if you have the ability to play with other friends, that makes it a lot more fun and a lot cooler. Many of my fondest gaming experiences have came from the ability to play with a group of other people who have basically similar goals in mind. So if you go ahead and form a link shell or a guild, depending on what game you're playing, and then you go on dungeons and raids, and you achieve something, you down a new boss that's been giving you a lot of trouble before, and you finally figure the strategy out. That's what makes these games for me. And then if you go and gather 2 or 3 of your friends to do some PvP, you can fight other people on another server or on the same server, defeat them in an arena or something like that. And while I haven't tried that out in Final Fantasy XIV, that is another cool aspect that I know many people like about MMORPGs. So if you like a social environment, building bonds with other people, working together, helping other people out, and going on really tough dungeons or raids together with basically your friends, then that seems to be what Final Fantasy XIV is about. And I would say that at this point, Final Fantasy XIV being the newer game that has mechanics which are superior to past games, you would want to play basically Final Fantasy XIV over an older game like Final Fantasy XI, of course, because that game's ancient, and probably, or maybe depending on your preference for lore and universe, WoW as well. Now, I'm not saying that WoW is bad, but unless you're heavily invested into the game, the system is kind of a lot dated, and it's tough to justify getting into it again. Whenever I try to pick up the game because Blizzard gives me a free trial or something like that, it feels dated. It doesn't feel the same as it was back in the day for, say, Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King, which I thought was kind of the height of WoW rating. But if you're looking for something you can play with your friends, you love the Final Fantasy universe, or especially you love the music that Nobuo Uematsu comes up with, then there's a lot going for Final Fantasy XIV. As far as MMORPGs go, it is on the high quality side of things. It's got a well-designed system, and I would say over the few days I did try the game out that I did enjoy playing it. Now, one last thing about the free trial itself, you are quite limited in what you can do with your account. You can't form your own party, and you can't whisper other people. I know that they did this for the same reasons they did it in Final Fantasy XI, which is basically to prevent gold spammers from flooding chat on infinite new accounts for one reason. But it does kind of really deter from you being able to get that group feeling in the game. You gotta basically wait until someone else who has already bought the game invites you to a party, or you have to wait until you can start queuing up for random groups with other people, which isn't quite the same as playing with your friends. So if you are going to try the game out, try to find out if one of your friends is already playing, go hang out on their server, join their link shell, hang out with them, ask them to help you get started with the game, and I think that's where you'll have the best experience.